Does this anime do justice to Yasuke, the Black Samurai? Hello, everybody. I'm Anaji, and this is FMV Reviews. So, Yasuke tells the story of a former samurai who's now laying low in a village, who gets tasked with helping this girl get to a village in order to heal her ailment. And while he's doing that, he's being hunted down by various mercenaries and assassins. So that's a very basic kind of plot summary. I'm going to be going into spoilers for this. It's not a super long show if you want to watch it. It's only 6 episodes, only about 30 minutes long. So you could watch it in like 3 hours like I did. But yes, I want to say I think the strengths up top for Yasuke is going to be the animation and the music. If I were to summarize Yasuke up really fast to somebody, especially if they're an anime fan, I would say it's like if you took Samurai Champloo and Afro Samurai and jammed them together. Except it's not Yasuke is not as good as either one of those series. So that's going to give you a hint about what I think about this show. But let me get into some of the stuff that I did think was good. I do think the animation for the most part is solid, but it does vary in quality. So, and what I mean by that is when characters are talking in this show, they have what I like to call the Johnny Quest effect, where their mouth just opens like a flap. It just opens like a flap. And sometimes the dubbing doesn't always seem to match the mouths, which makes it even more apparent that something seems kind of off. But then whenever any of the fight scenes for the most part come up, the animation gets very fluid, it gets very detailed. And so you have it where the show is swinging back wildly between this varied quality, which sometimes can be distracting. I do think Studio Mappa has potential, though. I believe they're the anime studio who did this. I do think they have some potential, though. I don't know if they're a fairly new anime studio, but they did solid enough work here and enough imaginative visuals. There was some really striking visuals in the show that I would be curious to see what other stuff they get up to after Yasuke. Another solid thing I would say is that Lakeith Stanfield, who plays the voice of Yasuke, he does a really good job here. I do think the writing at times lets him down in terms of some of the dialogue he has to deliver. It's not too bad, it's not too bad. I don't have him saying any super cringy lines or anything, but there are times where some of the stuff said is a little on the nose. But also, unfortunately, like the animation I had mentioned in the point before, but that vocal Johnny Quest mouth flapping kind of thing, that sometimes some of Lakeith Stanfield's lines, even though they're delivered well, they don't hit as hard as they could because the dubbing is either off or that Johnny Quest type of talking style robs it of certain subtleties and distinctions at times. I would also say that the villains in this have pretty solid voice acting cast. I didn't look up any of the cast for it, but they do have some memorable villains. I don't think the villains are necessarily given much development, but they do have some pretty cool designs, and it is fun to watch them fight and whatnot. So I'll also give it that. But I gotta say, the theme song, it slaps. Let me just give you a really quick. Okay, I don't want to get that YouTube copyright. But the theme song by Thundercat and Flying Lotus, it slaps. I never skipped the intro to this show ever. And that's a high sign, because there's some anime shows or just regular shows that you watch the intro once and you just skip it. I never skipped this. But yes, I want to say that the soundtrack done by Flying Lotus is actually the best part of the show, low key. I don't know if Flying Lotus has ever done work for other people or other movies or TV shows, but hey, after watching this, y'all need to hire him. The soundtrack here is very eclectic. It's a really interesting fusion of jazz, hip hop, some Japanese instrumentation, some pop stuff, electronic music. It's all this interesting mash, and it really helps because the show doesn't have really amazing writing. It really helps sometimes the music is what's really selling the scenes and the emotionality of this stuff. So I would say if you're looking for someone to do your score, Flying Lotus may be someone to look at. But I'm going to get into what I think is the main problem with Yasuke the anime series. But before I do that, I want to make sure to say, if you're liking this video, make sure to like this video and also subscribe to the channel. So yeah, let's get into it. So I think the big problem that this show is having is that it has this thing where, because Yasuke is a real person, there's historical context for him. He really existed in Japan. You have it where this history is being smashed up against crazy anime tropes. So let me just give you a really quick history about the Yasuke, the actual person. So Yasuke was a servant who traveled with, I believe, like Italian missionaries over to Japan, and he got there around 1579. When he was over there, he caught the eye of one of the daimyos at the time, which was Oda Nobunaga. If you know any Japanese history, you're going to hear stuff about Oda Nobunaga, and he became very interested in Yasuke because black people were not very common in Japan. So he caught the eye of Oda Nobunaga. Oda Nobunaga took him under his wing, made him one of his, I'm going to say generals or one of his samurai. And Yasuke served him until Oda Nobunaga was beaten back and had to commit seppuku. And then Yasuke served under Oda Nobunaga's son, I believe. And then after that, there's the history of about what happened to Yasuke. It starts to become less sure. But we do have historical context of the fact that there was a black samurai there in Japan who was serving under Oda Nobunaga. So the actual history is interesting, right? This black man in Japan, and let's be real, as black people for the most part, at least of maybe my generation and further, we love anime, right? I'm gonna link this. I'm gonna put a card to this video of why black people love anime. I think this YouTube channel in particular does a really good job of, I think, summarizing why us black people love anime. But yeah, it's this really interesting point where someone black was actually part of Japanese history and actually got to be a samurai. And that history is really interesting. Anytime the plot is dealing with that historical stuff of Yasuke coming up within the rank of Nobunaga's army, it is really interesting and emotional and captivating. But unfortunately, the story is not really about that. We're seeing a story that takes place after it. And the story that takes place after all that historical stuff is crazy anime stuff, right? You have you have a bunch of supernatural stuff within this show, which I'm actually okay with. I actually think it fits tonally pretty well within this. But then you also have crazy giant cell shaded robots, legitimately robots, show up in this show. And anytime that stuff enters the Yasuke story, it just totally takes me out of it and just, yeah, it just takes me out of the story. I just stop caring about what's going on. And yeah, so you're watching the show as there's this history versus this crazy anime stuff. And a lot of time, and then unfortunately what happens too is that it feels like Yasuke's story gets hijacked by more typical kind of crazy anime plot. Like you have it where Yasuke is protecting this young girl and trying to get her to this village, and these mercenaries are coming after them, right? But this girl has crazy psychic anime powers. You know what I'm talking about. If you ever watched Akira or any of that stuff, it's super over the top. Don't get me wrong, visually, it's pretty stunning. But in terms of emotionality and story, the story just doesn't really hit many emotional beats. It doesn't do it very successfully. And it's kind of a shame because I think if this show had leaned more into the actual historical stuff about Yasuke, I think the show would have done better. But unfortunately, it kind of gives into that crazy anime stuff. And I love anime, but there are times with some certain anime tropes that it just does not jive well with this more historical stuff. So I think with that, what I'm going to say is that Yasuke had a lot of potential. It meets some of it, but in terms of trying to fuse historical fact with crazy anime tropes, it kind of ends up not making good on some of that potential, but it does have some really good animation and it has a banging soundtrack. by Flying Lotus. So ultimately, what I'm going to say is I'm going to give Yasuke a solid 7 out of 10. So hey, if you saw Yasuke, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Maybe you disagree with me, maybe you agree with me. If you leave a comment down below, I'll comment back. So with that, I'm going to say, I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.